I've spent many years sitting in a courtroom, listening to people's stories. Some hide the truth, some make excuses, and some try to cover their own mistakes by blaming others. But today's case is different because this isn't just about money. This is about whether you can walk away from your responsibilities simply by saying, I couldn't. On one side, we have a woman who built a small salon through her own hard work. On the other, a young woman who was given that opportunity but failed to take responsibility. In this courtroom, I don't just judge the law, I bring the consequences of people's decisions into the light. And today, I want to know, is a contract just a piece of paper, or is it a reflection of your character? I first turned my attention to Miss Muscally. She appeared calm, but there was a noticeable tension in her eyes. I asked her, how long have you been operating this salon space? She replied, since November 2016. So this isn't some business that started overnight. This is the result of time, hard work, and consistency. The space itself isn't very large, about 500 square feet. But even in a small space, big dreams can take shape. It can accommodate 4 stylists working at the same time. Each has their own chair, their own station, but all under the same roof. It's like a small community where everyone shares the same space, yet works for themselves. I wanted to clarify the setup, so I asked, is this a separate room or an open space? She said, open. That means there are no walls, no private rooms. Everyone works in the same area. This is important because no one rents the entire salon. They're only renting a chair. But with that chair comes a responsibility. You bring your own clients, you do your own work. I also learned that Miss Muscally herself works there. She's not just the owner, she's also a worker. In other words, she stands in that same space every day doing her own work alongside those who rent chairs. I asked her, are you the owner of this space? She said, no, she herself has leased it from someone else. In other words, she's a lessee who subleases to others. This is a common business model, but it comes with risks. Because no matter what, you are responsible for paying your own rent. If your tenants don't pay, the entire burden falls on you. I asked her directly, what's your monthly rent? She said $724. That's her fixed expense. Now, she charges others $125 per week. That means if someone rents a chair for the entire month, they pay about $500. This calculation is very important because it shows who owes what to whom. Now, I turned my attention to the defendant, Dominique Williams, 22 years old. Young in age, but the decisions in life are significant. She rented a chair in the salon for 6 months. And the most important point, there was a written agreement between them. I always say, when you sign a paper, you're not just writing your name, you're making a promise. In this case, that very promise is now in question. Dominique claimed that she rented the chair under the condition that the owner would advertise for her and bring in clients. I stopped her right there. Because I know many people say things like this, but they don't put it on paper. I told her, show me the contract. In court, words don't matter, proof does. I made it very clear to her. There's a rule in law called the 4 corners of the contract. It means that what is written inside the contract is what counts as truth. What anyone said outside, or what was merely thought, none of that matters if it's not in writing. If you want to add a condition, it must be written down and signed by both parties. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. I asked her, does the contract say anywhere that the owner will bring clients for you? She went silent, because the answer was clear. No. That's when I said, then that argument won't hold here. In business, especially in cases like this, bringing in clients is your own responsibility. Now, I looked back at the time they started working together. Dominique said she began in February, but by mid-March, she had left. I asked her, did you pay the full rent? She said no. She only paid for 2 weeks. She didn't pay the rest because she didn't have any clients. I told her directly, it's not my problem that you don't have clients. It's a hard truth to hear, but it's the truth. Because nowhere in the contract does it say that you don't have to pay rent if you have no clients. You're using the space, so you have to pay. Those are the rules. In response, she said she had been there for 4 weeks but had already paid for 2. I asked her, then why didn't you pay for the other 2 weeks? She had no answer. And the problem didn't end there. She didn't pay for the months after March either, even though the contract was for 6 months. I tried to explain it to her again. This isn't a job where you just work and get paid. This is rent. You're using the space, so you have to pay. Many people don't understand this distinction, and that's exactly where the problem begins. This case holds a valuable lesson. Many people think, if I don't make a profit, I'm not responsible. But the reality is, in business, both profit and loss are yours. If you only want the profit but refuse to take the loss, then you're not ready for business. At this moment, I realized this case is simple on the surface, but it carries a big lesson. On one side, someone says, I was harmed. On the other, someone says, I couldn't do it. But the law doesn't listen to, I couldn't. The law looks at, did you make a promise? Now the question is, who will honor that promise? And the decision in this courtroom will determine whether responsibility wins or excuses. Sitting in the courtroom, listening to both sides, one thing became very clear to me. People often think, my situation is difficult, so the rules don't apply to me. But the law never considers personal circumstances. The law looks at the promises you made and whether you broke them. Here, Dominique is presenting her situation. No clients, no income. But I want to know, did she ever stop to think about the consequences before breaking the contract? I looked at her and said, You're 22 years old, right? She nodded. I tried to make her understand. Being young doesn't mean less responsibility. Many of life's biggest decisions are made at a young age, and we have to face the consequences ourselves. When you sign a contract, you do it as an adult. At that moment, no one sees you as a child. Every decision you make carries weight and has a cost. Dominique kept repeating the same thing. I didn't have any clients. I stopped her because I know this argument is emotional, but it doesn't hold in law. I told her, you rented a chair. This isn't a job. No one is paying you a salary here. You're running your own business. And business means risk. You can earn a profit, but you can also incur a loss. I asked her another important question. When you decided to leave, did you inform the owner beforehand? She said no. She gave no notice, had no discussion, she just took her things and left. This isn't just irresponsibility, it's a direct breach of contract. Every contract has rules, how it begins and how it ends. I explained to her, a contract isn't just about how it starts, it also has rules for how it ends. If you want to leave midway, there's a proper procedure for that too. But she didn't follow that procedure. She made a decision based solely on her own convenience. And when someone only looks out for themselves, others suffer. That's the reality. Now I turned back to Ms. Muscally. I asked her, did you try to minimize your losses? Because there's an important principle in law, mitigation of damages. It means that if you've suffered a loss, you are required to make reasonable efforts to reduce that loss. She said she didn't advertise. She only reached out to people she knew. I understood. She was under pressure. When a tenant suddenly leaves, a small business faces a serious risk. But I explained to her, business isn't just about working. It's also about making the right decisions. I told her, if you had advertised in newspapers or online, you might have found a new tenant quickly. But she didn't do that. I also understood her financial situation may have made it impossible for her to cover that expense. Here, the law seeks a balance between responsibility and reality. Now I looked at the whole picture. On one side, there's a person who provided the space, gave the opportunity, but didn't fully act professionally to minimize her losses. On the other side, there's someone who received that opportunity, but failed to fulfill her responsibilities and left in breach of the contract. Both sides made mistakes, but the responsibility is not equal. I looked at Dominique again and said, "Do you think you can walk away from here without any responsibility?" She went silent because she knows she made a contract, but she didn't honor its terms. Often, people know the truth, but they don't want to admit it. I made it very clear to her. Contract is contract. This isn't just a phrase, it's the foundation of the law. If you sign a paper, you must honor it. You could have chosen not to sign in the first place, but once you do not have the right to break it, at least not without consequences. Now I started calculating. Partial rent was paid in February, but from March to July, no rent was paid. At $125 per week, the total for 5 months comes to about $2,425. This isn't an estimate, this is an exact calculation based on the contract. Added to that was the issue of not returning the key. Many people think, it's just a key, what's the big deal? But in reality, it's a matter of security. The owner had to install a new lock. The contract clearly states if the key isn't returned, a $25 fee applies. So even this small matter becomes part of the total calculation. I sat quietly in the courtroom, looking around. Then I said clearly, judgment for the plaintiff. This means Miss Muscoli will receive the amount she claimed. Total, $2,425 in unpaid rent, plus $25 key fee, which equals $2,450. This isn't just a financial decision, it's a reflection of justice. The lesson from this case is profound. Everyone gets opportunities in life, but not everyone takes responsibility for them. If you avoid responsibility, eventually you'll pay the price, through the law or through life itself. The difference between a successful person and a failure is small. One says, I will do it, while the other says, I couldn't. But the reality is, the world doesn't listen to, I couldn't. The world only sees, what did you do? The path you choose today, that will determine your future.